All right, guys, welcome back. I gotta check my overhead lights. I always forget to turn off the overhead lights. Another episode of HawkDroppings with Hawk. It is Friday, June 14th. I hope everybody had a good week and is getting ready for a fun and safe weekend. Don't do anything stupid this weekend. Don't get arrested. And today we're going to talk about some people you've never heard of before. The first guy is a guy named Russell Vaught, V-O-G-H-T, who is a battle-tested DC bureaucrat and self-described Christian nationalist. He's drawing up detailed plans for a sweeping expansion of presidential power in a second Trump administration. He is somebody that I had heard of before, kind of in passing. He was Trump's last budget director. And why am I talking about this guy? He is an incredibly dangerous man for reasons which we're going to discuss. Not the least of which, and this is why I'm talking about him today, according to recent reporting and interviews with people who are in the rooms where these discussions are happening, Russell Vaught is Trump's leading candidate for his chief of staff if he gets reelected. Chief of staff to a president is an incredibly powerful position, especially when it's a president who is as lazy and disinterested as Donald Trump is. Russell Vaught wrote a chapter on executive power for Project 2025. He wrote the chapter on the power of the president for Project 2025, and that'll give you some idea of where his head is at. He would, so let's back up for 1 second. And I've done a podcast episode on Project 2025. I've discussed it pretty much in depth on TikTok as well, and on YouTube. It's almost 1,000-page document put together by about 400 people through the Heritage Foundation, guys like Russell Vaught. And it envisions a complete reshaping of the power in the office of the presidency and of the executive branch itself. So we have three branches of government. We have Congress, which is the House and the Senate. We have the judiciary, which is the federal courts, and we have the executive branch. The executive branch is absolutely massive. It's got a couple of million employees, dozens of different agencies. It's where all the cabinets are, the EPA, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Defense, things like that. And the goal of Project 2025, kind of the short version, is to dramatically expand the power of the president, to give him near dictatorial powers over at least the executive branch, to gut the executive branch. They want to fire 50,000 people on Trump's first day and replace those 50,000 people across all departments and agencies with people who their primary focus is their loyalty to Donald Trump and his agenda. Not to the United States, not to the Constitution of the United States, but loyalty to Donald Trump and loyalty to implementing his agenda at all costs. Project 2025 came about in large part because, especially during the last couple of years of Trump's presidency, he was trying to do a lot of batshit crazy things. And there were, the quote unquote adults in the room, people who got in his way, bureaucrats at these various agencies and departments, including the Department of Justice, who basically said, no, we're not going to do that. Generals and people at the Department of Defense who, just ignored or rerouted his crazier demands and requests, basically until he was out of office. But he did have some very smart loyalists in his corner. And those people Since the day Trump left office, they have been actively planning for his reelection and what they are going to do to the United States government and to the executive branch should he be reelected. And when I first read through Project 2025, I recognized Russell Vaught's name. He's somebody that I kind of been keeping an eye on. And last weekend on June 8th, I think it was the Washington Post, a reporter named Beth Reinhard, she did a profile on him, interviewed a lot of people around him. He refused to participate in her writing this article. And, but what emerges is, somebody who would be unelected, would be one of the most powerful people within the executive branch of our government, would answer only to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump doesn't give a shit about what this guy would do as long as this guy does one thing for Donald Trump, gets him total control over the Department of Justice. And that, it's like, Donald Trump, while he's campaigning, he's like, oh yeah, we're going to have policy on this. We're going to have policy on that. Sure, we're going to get out of policy. It's coming in 2 weeks, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't, for his second term, and he's very open about this during his campaign appearances, he does not care about anything as it relates to his second term other than revenge and retribution. And how can you do that when you're the president of the United States? You get a hand-picked attorney general, you get a hand-picked director of the FBI who will take orders from you and who will follow the orders that you give them, and they go out and prosecute and charge and arrest the people who Donald Trump tells them to arrest, whether there's any evidence they've broken a crime or broken a law or not. That, in Donald Trump's mind, that's the entirety of his second term. Vengeance, punishment, retribution against his enemies. Project, it doesn't take 1,000 pages in Project 2025 to say that. So they had different people write different sections about different departments and different agencies and things like that, environmental policy and tax policy and education policy. And it's all of this, white Christian nationalist fight the woke. I mean, it's like, this is supposed to be a serious document put out by serious people. And the word woke appears in it so many times. And it's just like, to me, it's like, that's like the number 2 criteria. If somebody wants to immediately demonstrate to me that they're a complete fucking moron, wear some Trump merch or tell me that you support Donald Trump. Second on that list is use the word woke in a sentence in a pejorative manner. It's like, just this week, there's a defense budget authorization bill that's coming up. And, that's normally an incredibly bipartisan, because both parties love love defense contractors and their money almost as much as they love AIPAC's money. And of course, the House Republicans added a bunch of stuff to make sure that no money is allocated for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the military, that no money is allocated for transgender healthcare services in the United States military, and, to make sure that no money is allocated that would make it in any way, shape, or form for any member of the U.S. military to be able to get an abortion. And, it's just amazing. It's like, you think the military's had difficulty over the last 5 years recruiting soldiers. It's like, they're Republicans want to do to the military what red states have done to their healthcare systems, with OBGYN and other medical professionals fleeing, no residents or med students coming into those states, no new physicians coming into those states. They're just decimating their healthcare systems, because they really don't like it when women have control over their own bodies. And, Republicans are embarking on a mission to do the exact same thing to the United States military. But so the Washington Post did a profile on this guy last weekend, and I started reading that, and I went down a bit of a rabbit hole on him for a few days, and it took me back into Project 2025, and I found some other things that I'm going to talk about today as well. But it's just, and I know I usually put out HawkDroppings on Monday, and I'm recording this one on Friday. It's just, this stuff was just a lot in the current environment of things. And the fact that this election is still so close, and as far as the polling of registered voters, which is people who may vote, it's not super close when you look at likely voters, people who actually voted in the 2020 election. And, a couple million of those people who voted for Trump in the 2020 election are no longer with us because they were old and they passed away. But, those voters are being replaced with new voters, young people, who Joe Biden has also managed to completely alienate for the most part. So, cool. It's like I joke about it, and frequently when I say that, a solid majority of the American electorate are idiots, and they're just selfish, and they vote out of selfishness for their own lives, or they vote in ways because their lives are so inadequate and unfulfilling. They vote in ways that will permit them through their candidates to hurt people that they don't like the LGBTQ community and immigrants and women. And yet they claim to be the most patriotic, and they claim to love America, but they hate 75% of the people who live here. So it's just, it's incredibly disheartening, the state that our country is in right now. And, the more that I read this kind of stuff, the more depressed, I guess, I feel about the prospects for the United States of America over the next decade or so. Because even if Joe Biden wins this fall, these people are here. There's 70 million of them at least. And they're not going to go away. And I've said this many times before too. There's never going to be, these people are never going to have some kind of an aha moment and realize that they were wrong. And, it's because they've made Donald Trump their entire identity. They've made MAGA their entire personality. They wake up every day, and navigate their way through each day in their lives by, how can I trigger the libs? How can I own the libs today? And that's how these people exist, except for guys like Russell Vaught. Russell Vaught is somebody who has been in government for a very long time. He understands the federal government. He understands how the federal government works. And he understands how to use the levers of power within the federal government, within the executive branch, to implement the most extreme parts of Donald Trump's agenda for a second term. And it's not even really Donald Trump's agenda, Trump's agenda comes from outside sources. It's like whatever is resonating with his base, he just works it into his stump speech. He doesn't care about 90% of the things that he talks about when he's out campaigning. He cares about staying out of prison, and he cares about taking over the Department of Justice so he can get revenge and retribution against people who have wronged him in some way, shape, or form. That's his entire agenda. And he's going to use very intelligent and very competent people like Russell Vaught to achieve those things. Russell Vaught calls his vision for a second Trump term radical constitutionalism. And he has helped craft proposals for Donald Trump to deploy the military, to use the Insurrection Act to deploy the military on Inauguration Day throughout the country. If there are protests against Donald Trump on Inauguration Day 2025, if he's reelected, and in the days and weeks after that, Russell Vaught's got a plan for that. He's got a clever interpretation of the Insurrection Act and a clever interpretation of posse comitatus, which prevents the military from engaging in military activity on U.S. soil. Russell Vaught's got a workaround, and he's backed up by an army of lawyers who are like, oh, that's totally fine. That's entirely constitutional and legal, Mr. President. You should do what Mr. Vaught says you're allowed to do here. And, this is Donald Trump, who wanted to shoot BLM protesters in the legs during the summer of 2020 when they were protesting in Washington, D.C., and his military wouldn't let him do that. Vaught's going to help him seize more control over the Justice Department and assert control to withhold congressional appropriations. So it's like Congress passes a budget, or they pass something like, funding for Ukraine. And Russell Vaught claims that the president has the power to manipulate that or withhold it altogether or place additional conditions on it. Like, but we're going to need you to do me a favor and dig up some dirt on Joe Biden. Since Trump left office, immediately, Vaught has led this organization called the Center for Renewing America, which is part of a network of conservative think tanks and advocacy groups that, since the moment Joe Biden was inaugurated, they have all been planning for a second Trump term. They started this work almost 4 years ago. And, it's like, what have Democrats been doing during that time? These groups are incredibly well funded by billionaires who want more tax cuts, and some billionaires who are fucking zealots in the same way that Russell Vaught is. And they quote in this Washington Post article, they quote an article that Russell Vaught wrote in September of 22 called "Renewing American Purpose," and in that, which I read that as well. He says, "We are living in a post-constitutional time," arguing that the left has corrupted the nation's laws and institutions. And when Trump was convicted in Manhattan recently of falsifying business records, Vaught tweeted, "Do not tell me that we are living under the Constitution." What fucking universe do these people live in? It's just amazing. And so, weirdly, the Trump campaign itself officially has distanced itself from the work of the Center for Renewing America and from the Heritage Foundation and from Project 2025. Basically, his co-campaign chairs, Susie Wiles and Chris Lasavitas, issued a statement saying, "Unless a message is coming directly from President Trump or an authorized member of his campaign team, no aspect of future presidential staffing or policy announcements should be deemed official." And, but then the RNC and Donald Trump named Russell Vaught, they named him policy director for the 2024 Republican Platform Committee for the RNC. And, Trump personally blessed Vaught's agenda at a Mar-a-Lago fundraiser for his group and said that Vaught would do a great job in continuing our quest to make America great again. Some of Vaught's recommendations, such as bucking the Justice Department's tradition of political independence, have long percolated in the conservative movement. But he is taking an even harder line, seeking to empower a presidential nominee who has openly vowed retribution into completely taking over the Department of Justice and making it a partisan part of the United States government, which literally is banana republic shit. And then it goes on to talk about how he participated in Project 2025. Vought wrote the chapter on the executive office of the president in their 920-page blueprint, and he is also developing their practical terms playbook for implementation during the first 6 months of a second Trump presidency. But that document has not been made public yet, nor do I think it will be. And of course, it's like, we're planting the flags now, Vaught told Trump's former strategist Steve Bannon on his far-right podcast. It becomes a new governing consensus of the Republican Party. So it's like he's buddies with all of these people, but he's been behind the scenes. You know, he's like buddies with Mike Flynn, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, you know, all of the whack jobs from Trump's first administration. He was raised in Connecticut, blue-collar folks, very strong Bible preaching church. He attended church camp every summer. He went to an evangelical college, and then he went to Washington, D.C., and started working for Republican House members and senators while he got his law degree from George Washington University. He started out focusing on government spending. He joined the Heritage Foundation, and then he joined Trump's transition team after that election. He had worked for Mike Pence in the past. He was nominated as deputy director of the Office of Budget, or Office of Management and Budget, and it was a 50-50 tie in the Senate. Mike Pence cast the tie-breaking vote for him to get that position in 2019. But so he had spent 15, 20 years focusing on the federal budget, and then who's the president that he's working under? Donald Trump, who added $8 trillion to the budget. So he didn't get what he wanted out of that arrangement. But it's like, then he kind of became this true believer in MAGA and true believer in white Christian nationalism, and using things like the federal budget to achieve these things, and doing things like drafting parts of the Project 2025 on executive power to pave the way for Donald Trump to take over the Department of Justice and start getting vengeance. And so he blamed Congress, not Trump, for the $8 trillion that was added to the national debt. He stood by Trump through his tumultuous presidency as a procession of other cabinet officials balked at breaching what they viewed as ethical and legal boundaries. He said a bunch of people around him were constantly sitting on eggs and saying, oh my gosh, he's asking me to violate the law, vowing that he would do those things for Donald Trump in his second term. And while he was, this was an interesting little nugget, while he was deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget, it was his office that held up the money that had been appropriated for weapons for Ukraine during Trump's presidential term, while Trump was trying to blackmail President Vladimir Zelensky. He called up Tim Vought and said, hey, hold that up. And Tim was like, Russell was like, yeah, no problem, man. And Russell Vaught put a hold on all of that money. It was like $500 million. And then when Trump ended up getting impeached for that, he was very vocal in defending Trump and saying the impeachment was bullshit. After that episode had concluded, the Government Accountability Office concluded that Russell Vaught's office had broken the law in holding up that military aid, holding up those appropriations, which had been made by Congress. And one person in the article is quoted as saying there's a marriage of convenience between Russell Vaught and Trump. Russ has been pursuing an ideological agenda for a long time and views Trump's second term as the best way to achieve it, while Trump needs people in a second term who are loyal and committed and adept at using the tools of the federal government. And that is Russell Vaught. He is a full-on election denier. He thinks the 2020 election was stolen. He has worked closely with Jeffrey Clark, the Justice Department environmental attorney, who was going to take over DOJ for Trump as acting AG. Jeffrey Clark, who's now been indicted in Georgia. He's an unnamed co-conspirator in the D.C. case. I think he may have been indicted in Arizona recently as well. I think the election was stolen, Vaught said in a 2022 interview with Trump activists Diamond and Silk, one of whom died of COVID because she wouldn't get vaccinated or wear a mask. He's no longer in touch with Pence, who had been a patron to him over the years. Doesn't talk to or about Pence anymore. He's pushing this strategy called radical constitutionalism. He says the left has discarded the Constitution. And when he says that, and I read this article, he says that the left, just got Congress basically delegate most of its responsibilities to these departments and agencies, and then let these departments and agencies engage in activities that were basically legislating and through the rules that they were putting forth and things like that. And that Republicans need to stand up and take our country back, or whatever the fuck it is they say. Our need is not just to win congressional majorities that blame the other side or fill seats on court benches to meddle at the margins, he said in that 22 essay. It is to cast ourselves as dissidents of the current regime and to put on our shoulders the full weight of envisioning, articulating, and defending what a radical constitutionalism requires in the late hour that our country finds itself in, and then to do it. I mean, these guys think they're the fucking founding fathers again. They write like they're Thomas Paine or Thomas Jefferson, or Ben Franklin. And one of the things that is like one of his pet things is immigration and illegal immigration. He wants to, using the Constitution and using the law, recategorize or reclassify, rename illegal immigration coming across the southern border as an invasion. That word invasion has very specific meanings when it comes to things like the Department of Defense and military authorization. If we are invaded, if an army invaded the United States, the military would respond on American soil. And he wants to reclassify illegal immigration on the southern border, even though it's down by 25% in the last year, as an invasion. And he wants to deploy the U.S. military to the southern border with its full military capabilities. He is 100% in favor of mass deportation and knows how to use the levers of government to work out the logistics and the finances to make that happen, setting up camps and setting up trains and buses. Because in his view, immigrants who are coming across from the southern border don't really have any sense of the Judeo-Christian worldview that this country was founded on. And they are incapable of assimilating into United States white culture, right? Mayonnaise and American cheese. The Civil War taught us that America is big and broad and strong enough to include non-Christians and non-whites. This was someone who pushed back against him. It should also have taught us that the greatest threat to American visions are radical and racial and religious supremacists. And that is exactly what Russell Vaught is. Moving on to, he wants to pave the way and provide the legal framework through which, Donald Trump in a second term can throw out 250-ish years of tradition that the Department of Justice is an independent agency that is part of the executive branch. It's part of the executive branch, but the tradition has been is that it operates independently of the president. And he said at a Heritage Foundation event last year, the Department of Justice is not an independent agency. He wants to gut the FBI too. And he said, if anyone brings up DOJ independence in a policy meeting at the White House, I want them out of that meeting and out of the building. He supports prosecuting officials who investigated Trump and his allies. He said it can't just be hearings. It has to be investigations, an army of investigators that lead to firm convictions. He said that to Charlie Kirk on Charlie Kirk's podcast. If you want to have some fun, go to Google and type in Charlie Kirk Gums. Trust me. He doesn't believe that any department or agency within the executive branch is or should be independent from taking direct orders from the president. And for most of the agencies and departments, that's true. But it never has been true of the Department of Justice. And it's something that's sacrosanct in the United States. And, he has people like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller on his side. He wants to use, he wants a nationwide abortion ban. He wants to outlaw in vitro fertilization. He wants to outlaw people's access to fucking birth control. It's like why these people spend so much time thinking about the sex that other people are having is something that I just will never be able to wrap my head around, other than it's just because they're not getting any themselves. I don't know. And it's like Trump is a blowhard, but he has a chance of winning. I don't think he will, but he could. In speaking about Vaught's group, the Center for Renewing America, Bannon said, no institution set up within its first 2 years has had the impact of this organization. We are going to rip and shred the federal government apart. And if you don't like it, you can lump it. Okay. So after that little 32 minutes of fun, let's just take a breather. I'm not going to go through this article that he wrote in 2022, and I covered the high points of what he wants to do as far as Project 2025 goes. So let's move on to the second thing we're going to talk about today. And the second thing, let me find it here, that we're going to talk today is the Society for American Civic Renewal. That sounds remarkably similar in name to the Russell Vaught group that we just talked about. However, this one is a secret men's-only right-wing society with members in influential positions around the country on a crusade to recruit a Christian government that will form after the right achieves regime change in the United States, potentially via a national divorce. That sounds fun. And it's like, let me back up for a second. So I'm going to talk about these guys for a little bit and who some of the guys are who are in this organization. It's almost funny because of the vision that they have and who they are. And the guy who founded this group is comical, but the guys who are in this organization aren't necessarily in positions of power as it relates to the federal government, but they are at a grassroots level across the country. And one of the requirements to be a member of this group is that you have to be independently wealthy. So these guys' minds are warped and they have a boatload of money individually to do the things that they want to do. And wait, hang on. I need to look something up here real quick. Because I forgot to write it down. Okay. So This group, the Society for American Civic Renewal, SACR, its members refer to it as SACR. It's open to new recruits provided that you meet a few criteria. You are male, a Trinitarian Christian, so none of you Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, heterosexual, and unhyphenated American, like African American, Mexican American, and can answer questions about Trump, the Republican Party, and Christian nationalism in the right way. One chapter leader wrote to a prospective member that the group aimed to secure a future for Christian families. And as soon as I read that sentence, I was immediately reminded of the 14 words. Many of you have probably heard me talk about the 14 words before. It's a reference to a slogan that was originated by a guy named David Eden Lane, one of 9 co-founding members of the defunct white supremacist terrorist organization, The Order. The 14 words that Mr. Lane came up with. Now remember, the quote from the SACR chapter leader is that we must secure a future for Christian families. The 14 words are, we must secure the existence of our people in a future for white children. Doesn't sound too far off to me. Plus, they only let you in if you're a man, and they only let you in if you're white and Christian. White Christian nationalism. Okay. It's a shadowy group. They have, like a main headquarters, and they have independent branches around the country. One of the main guys is the president of the Trump-aligned Claremont Institute, which is a think tank, which rose to prominence in recent years because that's where John Eastman used to work. John Eastman, who's now been indicted in 2 or 3 different jurisdictions as spearheading Donald Trump's fake elector scheme. They're in Idaho and places like that. They hate the LGBTQ community and want to take away all of their rights. The guy who... I got to find this guy. They had a thing about him in here. I'm going to skip ahead. The guy who founded it is a guy named Charles Haywood, who is a shampoo tycoon who lives in Indiana or something. He refers to himself in his writings as the maximum leader. Maximum leader Haywood Jablomi. Excuse me. No, Charles Haywood. I'm sorry. But these guys want to create many states within the state composed entirely of Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox Christian men. It's explicitly patriarchal, demands that group members assume a dominant role at home, and it celebrates the use of force and existence of authority. Cool. I mean, yeah. And it's these kinds of groups that it's from, I should rephrase that, it is from these kinds of groups that groups like the first group that we talked about are vetting people right now to staff the executive branch in a second Trump term. They're getting resumes from these kinds of jabronis right now so that they can just slide them right into the executive branch if Trump gets reelected. You see, I highlighted a whole bunch of stuff in this article, but it's just like, you guys know what it all is. They're like moose lodges, but racist and theocratic. So this guy, Haywood, Charles Haywood, he's got a blog on his website called The Worthy House, and he just writes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of blog posts where he lays all this shit out. And he's just a crazy person. He's an absolute crazy person, but he's rich. He's successful. He's financially successful in the United States of America. So even though he's crazy, he has all kinds of credibility. He says he can see what will likely come next after this current era of Joe Biden's tyranny. There will be a new feudalism, an archipelago of local armed patronage networks, a vision inspired by the groups of white settler farmers formed in South Africa as blacks struggled for majority rule. He's really, really hung up on South Africa and Rhodesia. And here's the best part. You guys are going to think I'm making this up. He does all of this stuff under the umbrella of a nonprofit that he started several years ago, so that it's 501c3, so that all the things that these people do are tax deductible. He named, you're seriously not going to believe me, he named his nonprofit the Howdy, Doody, Good Times Foundation, where he runs his white Christian nationalist organizations from. The Howdy, Doody, Good Times Foundation. But it's like he's recruiting influential people to join his cause. He talks a lot about the Civil War and how we need another one. And, you know, it's like Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Scientists, Mormons, and you have no place in the coming theocratic United States authoritarian regime. Some of this stuff is just funny. It's not super substantive, but, you know, and here's the difference between these guys and Democrats, man. These guys think long term. It's like, according to Haywood and the people who are members of this group right now, it's like they're not doing this for them or their families. They're doing this to lay the foundation for their sons to take over and fully realize the vision that these current guys have in place. So, you know, God help any of those sons if they want to be a ballerina or go into things like painting or music. You know, they're constantly talking about the left and how they have alienated men from family, community, and God. We counter and conquer this poison, rebuilding a society where a man can find genuine fulfillment, true to his nature and calling, rejoicing in virtue and vitality. Okay. The goal of the left was always total expropriation of white people and then, if at all possible, their extermination, a goal made explicitly by many powerful people in 2020. How, given this history, should white people respond? The left wants the extermination of white people. I would go out on a limb and say, you know, at least a plurality of people on the left are white. I mean, my politics are on the left. I'm not clamoring for my own extermination. But anyway, hang on one second. I think I got to sneeze. Maybe not. Excuse me. So now you know why it took me a few days to do this episode, because it's like this shit's just been eating in my brain for the last few days, which has been unpleasant. But at the same time, it's in my brain, and the way my brain works is it won't stop eating at my brain until I actually record the episode. And because I don't want to do it, then I procrastinate and I'm busy with other things. And so this week's been a little bit of a struggle. So we're 44 minutes in, and thank God, I wanted to get this one out of my system so bad. I feel dirty and polluted now after having spoken about that stuff for 45 minutes. Anyway, it's 4 p.m. West Coast time on Friday, June 14th, which means that it's already the weekend for you guys on the East Coast. Have an amazing weekend. I promise the things that I record. So what do I got? I got to do another. I got Full Potato Friday ready to go. I may do another Coffee with Hawk, and then I've been telling my brother for a month that I want HawkDroppings to each week be he and I on camera, and he keeps avoiding that every weekend. So He's like, the weekend got away from us. So I'm gonna make sure that happens this weekend. So I hope because you guys need some more Falcon time, and I always do as well. So I hope everybody has a good weekend. Thank you again for listening and subscribing, and I hope everybody has a great weekend. See you guys soon.